What is up, guys? The Strong Boys 19 here. So this is going to be my next live stream for today. And as you see from the title of the stream, I was originally going to be making a separate video for my response to your answers from my previous question video, which was going to be for albums that you consider to be underrated favorites, but due to the very bad lacking amount of free space to make a video on this mobile that I am recording this live stream with, I have just decided to do a stream without, any interruptions or editing whatsoever. So before I start, I have put up some separate tabs on YouTube, one for the comments and for the other, just to be sure if everything is all good to go. And so it looks very, very good from what I can see. So to anyone that is tuning in, please let me know if the picture and audio quality is really good. I did make a tiny little clip about the live stream a few hours prior to recording this on Instagram. So anyways, I am going to be going through the comments in the bottom to the very top. So I'm going to go from the first comments to the latest. So anyways, I'm just going to have a look and see if everything is all good to go. I've turned off the volume on my laptop so that I won't get any interruptions from a notification. Just going to refresh and see if everything's all right. I know I see myself 3 times when I'm looking at my screen right now, but I hope you guys are doing very, very well, staying safe and looking after yourselves with your friends and family. And I hope that this is just going to be a very nice, a calm, gentle stream. And if there's anything you want to ask or tell me, then feel free to do so. But for the sake of this live stream, it is more or less going to mostly be the response to your comments on the album's subject that I've made a video about a couple of weeks ago or more. So let's go into the comments, and I will at some points go back to the chat and see if there are going to be some comments from you guys who are going to be watching this. So here you go. So the first list of albums goes from the name of Shizazzle, one of my subscribers. He has done quite a list, and a lot of you guys who have decided to comment have made your own list. So let's start from the beginning, from the bottom to the top. Anyways, Shizazzle's list. He says that I noticed that a lot of albums that people say are the worst in metal, I actually think are okay, good to even great. Anyway, here are some of my picks. Iron Maiden with No Prayer for the Dying, The X Factor, Virtual 11. Anthrax with Stomp 442, Volume 8, The Threat is Real. Metallica, Load and Reload, The Saint Anger. Megadeth with Risk. Black Sabbath, Born Again and Forbidden. Bathory, Octagon and Requiem. Dio, Angry Machines. And lastly is Slayer's Diabolus Musica. Now, with my responses, these are all going to be my personal opinions, and if there are some that I have not heard of whatsoever, I do apologize. But anyways, I'm just going to go through these answers as best as I can with my words. Iron Maiden's albums of No Prayer for the Dying, The X Factor to Virtual 11. I don't think that No Prayer for the Dying has been one of the best albums to follow up a strong album like Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, because Seventh Son is more of the other classic albums in Maiden's discography. It was beautifully produced, and it was just one of the most progressive, if not the most progressive album that Maiden had created. But No Prayer to me is just the weakest in their discography. I can see why some other fans would like to defend the record, but in my personal opinion, it's not really one of the best follow up albums. I still don't like the sound of Bruce's vocals on some tracks, and the production is possibly at their rawest, but not one of the best. And it does have a weaker continuation as the discography carries on for me. So I don't really care for No Prayer for the Dying very much, and it just does not have a very consistent amount of songs. There were a few songs that I quite liked, but as a whole album, it's very lacking in a mostly consistent way. So there you go. As with the X Factor to Virtual 11, I know I've mentioned about the X Factor so many times, but I am one of the people that would love to defend this album, as I think it's one of the most criminally underrated metal albums of all time. And for those that have not seen my reviews for Iron Maiden's discography, please check that out. But I absolutely admire the X Factor's darkness. And yes, there are a lot of these very alike repetition ways of songwriting on some tracks, but I think the album does contain one of their most very underrated tracks that I do love. And I still think that the Blaze Bayley era does not deserve a lot of the hate, as a lot of people say that it's the worst era in Maiden's discography. The X Factor, while obviously it's still as divided and not as well acclaimed like the earlier albums and the later ones, obviously, but I just admire the X Factor because of what Harris wanted to make, and it is one of his favorite Maiden albums, so that was pretty much worth of the risk that Harris wanted to make. And to follow up Bruce Dickinson with Blaze Bayley was not a very easy move for them, because Blaze has a very different vocal style, but I think Blaze's vocals do work on the album. But not to mention that the way Bruce Dickinson does the vocals on some of the tracks live, like Sign of the Cross, for example, he adds in a lot more of a theatrical approach. But The X Factor is one of those albums that I just really couldn't help but to be very much addicted to the album as I was diving into the Blaze Bayley era. And as with Virtual 11, really not one of the best Maiden albums either. Production wise is an improvement, but it does contain some of my favorite Bailey era tracks. I do love some tracks like Future Real to The Educated Fool and The Klansman, Como Estas Amigos, but the really repetitive nature on tracks like The Angel and the Gambler to one of the worst Iron Maiden tracks of Don't Look to the Eyes of a Stranger. It's not really one of the well executed albums in Maiden's discography, but I can see why some people would say that it's not as bad as many people think that it is. I know that it got really negative reviews upon its release. I personally have heard worse metal albums than that album, but I'm one of the people that does appreciate the album, I guess, more than No Prayer. But to be honest with you, I think Virtual 11 does have moments. There are some really, really well performed and great tracks, but it's not as consistent as, the Maiden albums that many of us love. So Virtual 11 is one of those that I do defend as well, but not as highly as the X Factor. Anyways, going into Anthrax with Stomp 442 and Volume 8, The Threat is Real. I think Anthrax's discography has been pretty much consistent when Belladonna was on the lead vocal department, but going through lineup changes and through different eras, Stomp 442 to me is not a very well arranged album, and It's more of a groove metal oriented album. I'm not dissing the album for that. It does have some decent tracks, some that are passable, but in my opinion, it's not one of those that really defines one of these greater aspects of Anthrax. Not like with Persistence of Time to State of Euphoria, or even Sound of White Noise, which is a very underrated Anthrax album. I mean, obviously, it's not like the other greater, strong albums from the discography, but I never really cared for Stomp 442 very well. And as with Volume 8, The Threat is Real, personally, and probably for me, their weakest album. It's not as very well put together in a direction point of view, and there's just more and more filler to it. There are just some of these songs that are like not one of the best in terms of the quality of originality for um, Anthrax, but Volume 8 The Threat is Real is out of all of the Anthrax albums that I would regard, I think this one could maybe be, the bottom of the barrel for me as the least favorite Anthrax album. But at least that it's not all bad. So Volume 8, just like with Stomp, had some moments, but not one of these better albums. As with Metallica, for Load and Reload to Saint Anger, this is going to be controversial for some fans. I actually would like to defend Load. And I know that the Black Album does have a lot of praise, has been known as one of the classics. I am one of the people that will absolutely respect and admire the acclaim that the Black Album had. But I think that it's one of those other overrated albums because that so many people regard it as one of their very best albums. I know that it's well produced and does have one of their most popular hits, but I just never really look out to that album as one of their classic albums. But as with Load, I actually think that Load is more of a very repeatable album for me when I listen to it a lot. I think there are some excellent tracks on there. I love tracks like 2x4 and Ate My Bitch, King Nothing, and The Outlaw Torn and some other tracks. Though the album doesn't have like a complete set of very strong tracks, there are a few that I'm on the fence about, like The House That Jack Built and Mama Said is actually not a bad ballad, but I think Load does have some really underrated tracks that I do love, actually. Personally, maybe more than some of the stuff from the Black Album. As with Reload, I'll have to preface this that I think Load is the weakest Metallica album, and it's way too bloated. It does have a really shallow, inconsistent path of direction and musicality. The second half of the album does contain to me one of their worst tracks, and it doesn't follow up Load as very well as I wanted it to be. Though the singles from the album are pretty much like the great parts in the album and some others, but the album does not have some of their best abilities of tracks whatsoever. And I just think that to follow up Load, while obviously the album was made during the same sessions as the previous album, it's not one of those that I would be purchasing or just listen to a lot, really. So I think Metallica's discography after Load really starts to derail for me. And as with Saint Anger, I used to absolutely hate that album and regard it as one of the worst metal albums of all time, as obvious as it is. But I personally think that there was some purpose for Saint Anger, and I totally respect with what Hetfield wanted to make and what he went through, going through addictions, going through tons of rehabilitation. Though the bravery of writing lyrics from his experiences were not that well executed, and some of the songwriting on the album does have a really, really dire and repetitive atmosphere. But don't get me wrong, I actually think that the more I think about the songs on the album, there were some riffs that I thought were very good and engaging, but it's just from the overall overproduction, the repetition of the songs, and just the difficult time that some people would say about Saint Anger. Many people say that it's their worst album, though I will say that it's not a very good album per se. I think it's a record that I would respect, though still not one of the best different direction of albums from a major big band. As with Megadeth with Risk, I'm not going to talk about this album very much on here because that's the next Megadeth album that I'm going to be reviewing. But I'll just make this very brief, short and sweet. Though the album was a very big risk for Dave Mustaine, that he wanted to make this as like the most commercial sounding Megadeth album. There are some moments of good material, but due to the lack of anything memorable or very strong, like the earlier albums and even on the later albums, I will have to preference this that Risk could maybe be one of those albums that does get a bit overhated. And I'll just leave it like that because I want to do a full review on the album. Black Sabbath with Born Again and Forbidden. I used to not like Born Again at all because Born Again I thought had some of their worst material, but the more I understood it, the more I listened to it, I will appreciate the album more for what it is, but it's never one of my favorite Sabbath albums. There are tracks that I really got to appreciate more. The only songs that I like a lot are Disturbing the Priest to Born Again, and I do like some of the later tracks, and with what Ian Gillan wanted to make, after this album, I think his voice was not the same ever again because he shrieks and screams his voice out on this album, which is one of the best parts about the record. But everything else, it just does have some of the cheesiest lyrics, the worst production, and quite frankly, and obviously, one of the worst album covers of all time, as it does get a lot of divided attention. But Born Again is something that I like now. I quite like Born Again, but, you know, it's not one of the top 10 Sabbath albums. And as with Forbidden, I think this is another album that does get overhated. The production is still very weak, and it's containing some of their other weaker tracks of material, not as well arranged. But I do like some more of these tracks that I think were just severely underrated in my eyes, and obviously we'll say it's the weakest in the Tony Martin discography, but it has some moments that I do like from it. And Black Sabbath have not made a bad album. Obviously, it's hated because of the illusion of power and with some of the later tracks go. It's not as well defined like The Eternal Idol or Headless Cross, or even with Tia, in my opinion, because I do love a lot of the Tony Martin era of Black Sabbath, but at the same time, when it comes to Forbidden, I think it is a bit of a shame that they ended the Tony Martin era off in this note, because there were some tracks on Forbidden that I quite like, but it's not a well put together record, in my opinion. Anyway, as with Bathory, I unfortunately have not heard a lot of Bathory yet to really make a full comment on these albums. So, like I said earlier on, there are going to be some albums I've not heard, and I absolutely apologize for it. But these two Bathory albums I've not heard all the way through yet. But I've been meaning to dive into more onto the black metal discography, like with a lot of more Mayhem to Burzum, and I'll have to look into those two albums. As with Dio's Angry Machines, I think the album is not one of those better albums, as some people will say, and though it's not as bad as some people will claim it to be, it's no Holy Diver and it's no Last in Line, etc. But Dio's been going through lineup changes, and with the musicians that he worked with, I can understand and respect the idea that the lineup at the time of this album's era was made for this particular album, but it's not one of those records that delivers as well as the earlier albums. Though I think that it does have a purpose that I would personally accept. As with Slayer with Diabolus Musica, I know some people do like this album, but for me, I just never liked this. But I just think that the weakest part about it is possibly the very bland, lackluster, and directionless experience I have with the album. There are tracks that I have liked, but it's just down to the production and the unmemorable nature that the album continues to do for me. And I totally respect that the album was made through a lot of Jeff Hanneman's songwriting, and Kerry had not got a lot of this involved in the writing process. And I know that this was at the time when new metal was going around with bands like Linkin Park to Slipknot, Cold Chamber, Korn, Deftones, etc. But this trend for Slayer is not very good, and it's not one of those Slayer albums that I obviously would go to so much. As for me, it's the worst album in the Slayer discography. So thank you for your list, Shizazzle. And I'm going to have a look at some of the comments. Oh, geez, there are some already. Guitar Storms, welcome back. I hope you are doing very well. Greetings, Mike Janes, and Psycho's Platters, another one that I'm not familiar with. And Matt, how are you? Hope you're doing very well, mate. I personally think Maiden sounded like a band running out of steam by the time they released Fear of the Dark. I think that Fear of the Dark is a very underrated Maiden album, but I think it's more of an above average record. But I think that Iron Maiden had gone back to their natural roots with the era of Brave New World, and I love a lot of Brave New World, and as well as the Book of Souls. I do like some of the later Maiden albums, but I think that Iron Maiden were losing steam from the No Prayer album, and I guess a bit of the Virtual 11 album. But I respect your opinion. Guitar Storm's Load albums are really good. Platters, I do like Born Again. If you get distracted by this side of the screen, I apologize. I do like Born Again. I still think, though, that the mix seems muddy and needs a little cleaning up. I doubt this would ever happen, but I would have wanted to hear Born Again in a bit of a remix style. And there were a lot of rumors that Tony Iommi was going to remix or remaster the Forbidden album. There's no more new clues to that, so I doubt that would happen. But with Born Again, I think that would be a very difficult task to change the tone on that album's production. Not gonna lie, never listened to Forbidden. Yes, love those three Tony Martin Black Sabbath albums. Ride to Dio opinion, I like most of his solo output. That's fair enough, and I personally will say that the Dio discography is sometimes more of the favorable approach, though I would say that some of Ozzy's solo albums are very good. But I think that the last strong Ozzy album was No More Tears. But I can see where you're coming from in terms of more of the consistency for solo artists from legendary heavy metal bands and icons. What's happening, Matt? looking at your comment there. Guitar Storms, I think Slayer's Kerry King was messing around with 7-strings guitars then. I don't know about that, so I can't really say anything about that. I have never seen a picture or even a live clip of Kerry King playing through a 7-string. Fine over here. Good to talk to you, sir. Same to you, Matt. Hope you and the community of 66 Samus are doing well. Much love to you, mate. Platters, that's okay. I recently subbed to you. Thank you very much. And just tripped onto your broadcast here and digging it. I'm really glad that you are digging this. And welcome aboard to watch any of my videos. It does mean a lot. And welcome new subscribers, as I've said previously on multiple last few streams. It definitely boosts up the channel. Like and subscribe and comment on any video that I put out. Guitar Storm's new Carcass record is amazing. For those that have not seen my review on their new album, that was the previous video. Please check that video out. And it is one of my favorite albums of the year. Platters, my favorite Maiden period will always be those 80s albums. But yes, I do like some of their stuff since then. I think that the 80s output for Iron Maiden is always the most consistent direction, a lot more than the modern day Maiden era. But I'll have to say that the whole discography has been mostly consistent throughout. Much more than Judas Priest to Black Sabbath. And even though that Judas Priest have quite a number of great albums. But I think that Iron Maiden's discography is definitely worth of the longest consistent amount of albums that were as important and influential. So there you go. Multilate HD. Hi Greg, it's James M. Hello James. Glad to see you here. I'm doing very well, and thank you very much for your compliments. Narrated Myths and Legends. Sorry if I'm late now. Don't be sorry at all. We've just started around like more than 10 minutes ago, I guess. But welcome in for the stream, and thank you for coming. Platters, I know I'm being a wishful thinker here, but I think that Sabbath could get back together even for a short EP. A better note for goodbye than 13, who knows. I personally think that 13 would have just been the very suitable album to finalize Sabbath's career. And I know lately Ozzy has not been in the best of health or shape whatsoever. And Geezer Butler has been doing his own solo project thing. And same with Bill Ward. No idea what Tony Iommi has been doing. But I doubt that Sabbath will ever come back into the classic lineup. I mean, Bill has been out of action from Black Sabbath pretty much since their late 90s reunion tour. And I know some people don't like 13 very well, but I think it is one of my favorite Sabbath albums. And I think that is a fitting album than Forbidden to finalize their discography. Anyway. Guitar Storms, I did see Dio on his 2005 tour in Dublin. He played all of The Last in Line and a few Black Sabbath songs. It was magical. The power in his voice, that is awesome. And Bill Ward needs a send-off with Sabbath. I absolutely will say that Bill Ward had finished his time with Sabbath in a bit of a disappointing note. And I know that Black Sabbath's Born Again was the last album to have him on the drums, but I personally think that Black Sabbath from the reunion era with that reunion live album, I think that's just the best way that we'll ever hear the classic lineup of Sabbath in their best way imaginable. Obviously, it's my favorite lineup of Sabbath, but you can't go wrong with the Tony Martin era or the Dio era. I do respect the Ian Gillan era, but I think that the Glenn Hughes era, despite it being very toxic and awful on the Seventh Star tour, that could have been something for the better, in my opinion. I don't know if you brought it up, but what folk metal albums do you consider underrated? I'd like to recommend the bands Abracadabra and 13th Tambourine Russian bands. And then he just said 13th is Ukrainian. Don't apologize. I can't really answer that type of question, but I think personally I'll have to just stick to some of the lesser known albums from bands like Fintroll or Korpiklani. Some of their albums can be underrated that I do like, but I can't really comment onto that, and I do apologize. Anyways, I'm gonna get back to the comments. So I will be back. I will go to the comments here, but I'll have to look at the later comments. So I will answer as quickly as I can. Heavy metal music of destruction. Aiden French. Venom, black metal, Iron Maiden, Killers, Judas Priest, Rock and Roller, Celtic Frost, Cold Lake, and Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason. I don't think Iron Maiden's Killers is underrated whatsoever. I mean, some fans say that's one of their best albums, and I think it's a very good album, but it's more of a very good follow-up to the debut. I'm more of a fan of the debut myself, but I don't think that Killers is at all underrated. Unlike like the X Factor or even some that I do defend, like The Final Frontier or A Matter of Life and Death per se. But I was surprised. And he also mentioned Volume 3 by Slipknot. I don't agree at all because I think Volume 3 has always been regarded as one of Slipknot's best albums. I would not say that it's a classic. It's not Slipknot's best album. The first two albums are their classics. But I find that albums like The Grey Chapter to be pretty underrated. And the more I actually have been diving into the discography, The Grey Chapter over time for me had got a bit more weaker moments, but there are some underrated great stuff on there. I mean, I will personally say that We Are Not Your Kind does have some of their underrated stuff that as an album that I prefer over The Grey Chapter. But I personally don't agree with Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses. If I would have had to pick my most underrated Slipknot album pick, I guess it would have to be Point 5, The Grey Chapter, because I know that there are some Slipknot fans that don't regard it as a strong album, or some say maybe that All Hope Is Gone is a better album. Judas Priest, Rock and Roller. I don't think Rock and Roller is that much of a great album, but I do like that it has a separate beginning, like their first trying out phase. As a debut album, it's not as a brilliant album like with Black Sabbath's debut or Iron Maiden's debut. Rock and Roller has a few weaknesses and a few filler tracks. Nothing really to write home about a lot, really, but it does have some moments that I do respect. I can't really say much about black metal from Venom because Venom are a band that I would have wanted to check out, but in terms of more of the favorable bands like Burzum to Dark Throne and Mayhem, etc., can't really say anything about that one, so I apologize. Same goes with Celtic Frost's Cold Lake. I know that's one of their albums where they go in a very different trend and style, but I'll have to dig deeper into the whole catalogue of Celtic Frost because they are a band that I have heard a lot about. So again, like with black metal, don't really have anything to say about that record. Pink Floyd's A Momentary Lapse of Reason is an album that I have views about. I think A Momentary Lapse of Reason is not a great album, not one of the best albums, but I think that it is an album that I would slightly pick above the Final Cut. And also, if you haven't listened to the 2019 remix, that is a way better improved sound of an album than the original album's production. It has a bit more of the fresher dynamic sound, and it makes me respect the album. It's just really the second half of the album where it starts to uh, derail, in my opinion. The second half is not one of the best halves from a Pink Floyd album, but I do like the first half personally a lot more. Learning to Fly to the Dogs of War. I actually think that Sorrow is a very good, excellent closing track to finish off A Momentary Lapse of Reason. And it's an album that has moments, just like I said from the previous albums, but it's not like one of the strongest albums in Pink Floyd's discography. So I guess I would buy the remix version of A Momentary Lapse of Reason over the original pressings of the album in terms of production value. The next comment goes from Pecky Peck. Second Coming, obviously, by the Stone Roses. U2, the band in general, they get a lot of flack, but I got some of their albums from the charity shop today at the time of this comment, and they're quite good. Iron Maiden's The X Factor again, and Wishbone Ash, Wishbone 4, The Rolling Stones, Black and Blue. Regardless of what people think, I love it. I think that Second Coming is an album that, again, I won't talk about much on here because I'm going to be doing a full album review on Second Coming. I think that it's the number one album that I accept as the most underrated album of all time because obviously it's not like the debut album. And with the difficulty surrounding the band outside of recording the album and through tensions between Brown and Squire and their band manager, multiple lawsuits, Second Coming is an album that I really like a lot. It does contain some brilliant bluesy jam packed songs and a few folky Zeppelin inspired tracks, but it's not like the debut album where I think the first album is much more defining and memorable. But I will go in deeper depths when I will talk about Second Coming. As with U2, since you've not mentioned about any album, they've never been one of my favorite bands, and I just can't stand the egoism of Bono whatsoever. It's not that I don't like the band because of him, it's just that they just never really grab a lot to me to have an interest. I used to hear some occasional songs, and I still do, but they're just not one of those bands that would work for me. And I just personally think that they are one of those other overrated bands, but yet they do have some decent tracks that I could accept. Iron Maiden's The X Factor, Wishbone Ash with the fourth album. Can't really comment on that one because I think the Wishbone Ash discography has been pretty much very underrated and overlooked after the what many fans say like the classic earlier output of their albums. So I'll have to listen to a lot more of their stuff. The Rolling Stones with Black and Blue. I know that I've done a Rolling Stones album ranking on their discography, and somebody said that they can't watch the rest of the video because of how low I've put Black and Blue in the list. I just don't like the album very well. I think Cherry O Baby is one of the worst covers I've ever heard. The very sloppy, raw looseness of the jammings, and especially with the unnatural connection that I have with the album. It's not as bad as Dirty Work, in my opinion, but I find that the album is worth of the compromise with Wayne Perkins and Harvey Mandel, but being the Rolling Stones album that it is, to me, it's not very, very well arranged either. It's just one of those albums that is just hit or miss for me. It's just a below average record. So that's all I would say on that. And I've seen some replies from other people. Let's get back to the comments. Billy Bishop. How about some good Black Sabbath albums? What's your favorite one by them? If you have not seen my discography re-ranking video, my favorite Black Sabbath album is Sabotage, my new favorite Sabbath album. Guitar Storms. I recently got the tablature book of Killers, and the amount of things they play guitar-wise you can't hear on the record. Dave Murray and Adrian Smith were so prog rock influenced. I think Iron Maiden went into progressive rock, into the sound for Somewhere in Time, and obviously the proggiest album being Seventh Son of a Seventh Son. But I can see why some of the riffs do have a bit of that prog-ish influence. But I never think that Killers does have some of their proggy-ish riffs. It's a progression for the band, musically and musicianship-wise. But I think, for me, they started to become more of the proggy sound with that album of Somewhere in Time. Narrated myths and legends. Oh gosh, a lot of comments. I'll make an underrated list of folk metal then. There are some that I cannot pronounce, so I apologize. Throathaugen, Obscure. There are some that I just can't really read whatsoever. Swamp, My Neighbor, Fintroll, Jorgens, some that come to mind right now. Plenty of really good songs, but it had the bad luck of coming right off the Nat Fod and Yatkins Tid, which are hard acts to follow. I think the albums like Nat Fod, to me, that's their classic album, and it's my favorite Fintroll album. And Nat Fod was one of the other folk metal essentials. Brings a lot of nostalgia for me. Yatkins Tid, I do like a lot as well. Swamp, My Neighbor was varied and fun and sort of the perfect balance from the previous albums. Throathaugen was crazy inventive and took the influence from so many styles and had so many catchy sounds that it's something that really stuck with me. There are a lot of these releases that I have not heard of whatsoever, but if I completely forget whatsoever, which may happen, feel free to message these albums to me via Skype, and I'll have a look on them. And as well, with your latest comment, I agree about U2, not my style either. So let's get back to the other comments. Billy Bishop, The Fragile Art of Existence by Control Denied is very underrated to me because it was the last thing Chuck Schuldiner recorded before he had cancer and died. I think The Fragile Art of Existence does get a bit of an overlooked shadow after the era onto the Death discography, when Chuck and the rest of the musicians who worked with him went through the technical phase of the band's music, from albums like Individual Thought Patterns, Symbolic, Human, Sound of Perseverance. I really think that Control Denied is a fantastic side project metal band, that it does have a very alike vein to Symbolic and the Sound of Perseverance. I think it's a very strong debut album and only album. It's not an album that I would personally think that it's like a classic, but it does have some incredible musicianship and wonderful lead guitar playing from Chuck. And as with the rest of the musicians, they were just so atmospheric with each other because of the way the music sounded. And I really do appreciate Control Denied as a very underrated side project metal band. Same goes with others like Nailbomb, for example. So I think The Fragile Art of Existence is very strong for what it is. Duke of Italy, King Crimson, Wake of Poseidon, Lizard and Islands. I will say that King Crimson's discography is mostly a consistent amount of work, more than Pink Floyd, in my opinion. Though Pink Floyd being my favorite band in the progressive rock genre, but I totally agree with albums like Islands. I think that is an underrated classic, and it is one of my favorite albums of all time. And I think Islands does have a separate ambience to it. It has more of a fulfillment with beauty, especially with Formentera Lady to Islands. And I love the instrumental of Sailor's Tale, which I love. One of my favorite King Crimson tracks. It's a very brief era that I like very much. In the Wake of Poseidon, obviously, is like In the Call of the Crimson King. Some people say that it's not as well balanced as the debut album, but I think that it's one of my personal favorite Crimson albums. I know some of the songs do have a reminiscent of the first album, but it's never really bothered me very much, and I really do love some more of the adventurous yet atmospheric direction. And as with Lizard, I think Lizard is a very, very solid album. Not as strong as the other two you've mentioned, but I'll have to personally say that as an album cover, Lizard is easily one of the top three best King Crimson album covers. But as an album, it's very different. It's got a separate artistic identity. And if I would have had to select other underrated King Crimson albums that are one of my favorites, I would say Beat is one of my favorites. As well with some of the later albums, there are some excellent records post the era from the albums like Red to Lark's Tongues in Aspic. I actually find that Islands is mostly their most underrated. Also, the last Enslaved album was awesome, and I feel like nobody talks about it. I can't really say anything about Enslaved because I don't have the experience of listening to their albums yet, so I apologize. But thank you for some really good picks, Duke of Italy. Neto Shopper, Power Windows by Rush, who recently subscribed to the channel. I think Rush's discography after the albums like 2112 to Moving Pictures, Hemispheres, etc., they really do get a bit of bad flack when they go into more of the poppier sense of their sound. I think that Power Windows is an album where some people like it, some people don't. I, for one, can be one of the people that likes the album for what it is, though it's not as a highly outstanding album, not as a presentable or even as a theatrical record like 2112. But I think that Power Windows does have incredibly great musicianship, and some of the tracks were very good for what they were, but not one of the classics. Not one of the classics to me into their discography. And I know some people give others like Test for Echo or the other album like Presto a lot of flack, which I'll have to dig deeper into a lot of the later Yes catalogue of their records. Zach D Productions, how's it going, mate? If you're watching, Zach D Productions list goes to Rush again with Power Windows, Iron Maiden's The X Factor. Yes, going for the one. I think that album is very underrated for its own significance. The album does have the title track, Going for the One, which is just fantastic. And Awaken, one of the other incredibly beautiful songs that Yes have ever put out. And while it's not as consistently flowing in a very strong sense like Close to the Edge or the Yes album or even Relayer, but Going for the One was one of the first Yes albums that I've ever bought and listened to, and I really like it very much. It is a better album than the albums like Tormato and the Union album, which I actually quite like a bit of Union, and even Drama, which I think is very underrated. Asia with Araya, I don't really have anything to say about these types of supergroup albums. Not that I don't listen to them as much, but I respect supergroups. Asia are one of the bands that I do look out to for some moments, but I can't really say a lot about the Asia album that you've mentioned, other than that I've heard that the later albums from the band were not really well regarded or as well received as the debut album. So apologies, I can't really say words about that one. Van Halen Diver Down. Sorry for the mispronunciation. Diver Down, I think really I've never been a fan of Van Halen always in my opinion, and Diver Down to me it's just one of the albums that if I would have been a Van Halen fanatic or just a fan, I wouldn't really write home about, but I cannot stand their cover of songs. I don't really like their cover of Oh Pretty Woman. That I just thought it was absolutely awful. I just really can't stand it. And same goes with their Kings cover. I mean, I guess it's better than their Roy Orbison cover, but I just never accepted some of the covers Van Halen have done. So there you go. So nothing really much I could say about Diver Down or the later era of the Van Halen discography. Let's go back to the comments. Uh, Narrated Myths and Legends. Another bands that get underrated a lot these days are Manowar. I think Manowar are a very talented, gifted band. They're not a band that I would personally buy or anything. I don't mean current Manowar, but classic Manowar from during the days when Ross, the boss, was with them. Bad attitude from Joey later leads to a bad rep for the band, I think. Mick, trying to read these words properly. Not really underrated at all, but I love Discipline by King Crimson. Discipline is an absolute classic, and I have no idea why it took me so long to get into Discipline. I should have got into that album when I first got into Beat, but I absolutely adore Discipline. It's one of my personally top 5 favorite King Crimson albums of all time. Guitar Storm's Diver Down is terrible. Half a covers album, really. I don't mind covers albums, but it depends if someone or some band that I really like would make a covers album that would stand out. There are a lot of covers that I really like so much, but I can't really address a lot that I would personally cope with or just really listen to. Sam Cooke, I recently got into, and he's great. Sam Cooke, wonderful artist. What a brilliant voice he had, and I do admire that type of direction into a lot of the greats from solo artists. There are a lot of legendary solo artists for their big hits, and just a wonderful talent. And Sam Cooke, as you say, Guitar Storms, he's great. Anyway, get back to the comments. We're more than halfway through already. Calico Silver, Todd Rundgren's Todd album from 1974. Everyone rants about the 1973 A Wizard, A True Star, and rightly so, but no one seems to talk about its follow-up, Todd, which, in my opinion, is even better. Speaking of Todd Rundgren, I really wanted to get into his discography very frequently, but I've just ordered the album, I believe an original pressing via Discogs of his Utopia album. So it's really funny that you say that. But I really do think that Todd Rundgren's discography could be worth of a while of a journey to discover. So again, I can't really address more of the things to talk about for Todd Rundgren in terms of his solo discography. But if there are any Todd Rundgren fans in the chat, please address what you think is your favorite Todd album and recommend them to me. And I'm actually looking forward to discover his stuff, with Utopia being the starting point for me. So I'll have to check out his Todd album and one of his other well-received albums. Mick James, his list this time: Rush, Grace Under Pressure, Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band, Marillion, Sounds That Can't Be Made, Indigo Girls, Swamp, Ophelia, and XTC, Oranges and Lemons. Rush's Grace Under Pressure is very, very good. I really like that album a lot. It was at a trend when Rush decided to go very much a new wavy, commercial-ish kind of vein into their sound with their discography. And I get it that some people don't like Rush for doing that, like with albums onto Power Windows and Signals even, but I think Grace Under Pressure is an excellent record. There's a lot more melody from Geddy Lee that I admire, and the synthesizer sounds were adding in a lot more of the texture into the band's music. But I think that with this direction of Rush, I can see why some people would not really regard it as one of the best, but it's something that I could really enjoy very much. As that I personally sometimes would like to hear some more of the cleaner tonality onto Alex Lifeson's guitar work and the rhythmic ability of Neil's drumming work. But I think Grace Under Pressure is really great, had some wonderful production, and I don't see why some people say that it's a bad album or just not one of the best. Deep Purple's Come Taste the Band. Now, here's an album like this one that I can see some people either love this album or just don't really regard it as one of the other strong albums. Obviously, it's through a different lineup change, and I really do admire that bands go through different lineup changes, that some people do like to think that it's a great direction, or it just depends if what their views are for a band that goes through a lineup change with only one album, then through another lineup change. But I personally would say Come Taste the Band is a very good Deep Purple album. Not one of their classics to me, but it's not like others that I love, like Fireball to Machine Head, Burn, or even on their live albums, like Made in Japan, for example. Come Taste the Band. I think it's just a very, very good album. Haven't really been diving into a lot of Deep Purple lately, so they were one of the bands that I am considering to return to. As with the other three, I know that I've heard a few from Marillion, but in terms of albums involving XTC and Indigo Girls, um, can't really address anything onto these albums. I can see that some people don't even like Marillion because they would say it's like a knockoff of Genesis. And speaking of Genesis, I'm actually going to see them the coming Tuesday. Um, but I do apologize. I can't say anything about these albums. But so far, from what I've been reading, thank you to the people that decide to comment on that video. And it really does mean a lot because it keeps me interested to see what your picks are in this type of comments for albums. Ethan Work only has one album, Deep Purple's The Book of Taliesin. And again, this is another Deep Purple album that some people would not really regard as a brilliant record. But I find with the earlier era of Deep Purple, or even some of the later era albums of Deep Purple, they don't really deserve a lot of the flack. And I know that there are a few weak albums, but I think the Book of Taliesin album doesn't really deserve the dismissive or even the mixed reception. Obviously, it's not one of the strongest records, in my opinion, in their discography. However, I think that besides the Deep Purple had been progressing even further with some of their stronger albums, even like within Rock, another one that has been a fantastic album. Um, this book album kind of does get overlooked, so I do agree that it does get very much underrated. So have a look at the comments. Sorry for the buzz on the phone if you hear it. Harvester of Pizza. Wow, fancy seeing you here. Did not expect that. Hope you are doing great, mate. Guitar Storms. Who have you been listening to lately? Any new guitar stuff? Not really. Like new guitar stuff wise, just a lot of metal albums lately and some new releases. I've been listening to some more Sleep, to Devin Townsend and Fear Factory, a bit of Boris, and some more new albums that I will be reviewing. I am going to be reviewing the new albums from Trivium to Yes, Devin Townsend, his 2 new albums coming up. And I would like to continue listening to some more of these new albums just to get myself in preparation for my rankings on my favorites and worst albums of the year. Stale Fluid, are you into true Indonesian brutal death metal? I've not really heard a lot of bands into that kind of genre from another country. I mean, I do love quite a lot of death metal, but never really heard a lot of the Indonesian style of death metal because a lot of them that I listened to were either from the UK to the US and a bit of French, like Gojira, for example. But I'll have to listen to some more bands through that genre in other countries. I'm glad you're doing good, Harvester of Pizza, and welcome to the stream. And you're one of the people that I did not expect to see you at all in any of my streams. But thank you very much for coming in. So, Harvester of Pizza, what we're doing here is that I am answering a lot of comments from a previous video on albums that people consider to be their favorites in the underrated spectrum, as I've been reading off a lot of the other people's comments. So I'm pretty much more than halfway through, as I've said earlier on. But this is just my response to it through a live stream instead of a separate video. Al Brook, a few titles from a Russian music lover. It's awesome to see different people from different countries sending comments. Colin Newman, A to Z, TMC, Filigree and Shadow, Addy Edward, Picture of Youth, Baseball, Greg, Sleep, Banzai, Florist, Demos. I'll have to be honest, again, I have not heard anything. I can't say anything whatsoever about these albums. And there are just these albums that you and many people have listened to that I've not really heard of. So it would be awesome if you would message me via either Skype or Instagram, Instagram being GB Music Buff, of albums that you've listened to that I've not heard of, that I would like to know what type of genre these bands and albums are. But Al Brook did say something very different about an album that so many people adored by everyone that he never liked, Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. That one was very surprising. How is it not a big album that you don't like? I mean, I respect your honesty, but I think Selling England by the Pound is the greatest Genesis album and one of my favorite albums of all time. And it had the best production. To me, it had some of the most beautiful, theatrical, adventurously melodic, just a wonderful, presentable arrangement of material with some of their greatest songs of all time. And as much as I love the classics like Foxtrot and A Trick of the Tail and a lot of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, Selling England by the Pound is always to me their staple in the Genesis discography. Speaking of Genesis again, I will be back to do the reviews in the Genesis discography, and I'm so sorry that I've been awfully lacking on the band's discography, as well as with Megadeth and other incomplete discographies. But I am going to be continuing and switching back into incomplete discographies. But anyways, let's move on to the next one. Mr. Metabolic, Slipknot The Great Chapter. I have already addressed my personal views on The Great Chapter, and come to think of it, I would maybe do a re-review on Point 5 The Great Chapter, or maybe not. I'll have to really think about it. But I am going to continue doing the Slipknot dedicated album review series in dedication for Joey, because I am now into Volume 3 and All Hope Is Gone, and that's it. So I need to invite some more different people to review these two Slipknot albums separately in collaborative album reviews. But I can see why some people say that The Great Chapter is very underrated, and I do love a lot of the tracks onto the record. There are some to me that, for me, do contain some of the weakest lyrics, like some from All Hope Is Gone, and some of the tracks are not as well consistent or as a brilliant amount of delivery like the earlier Slipknot albums. But I really do respect The Great Chapter for what it is. And the last comment goes from Andy recently. He says, Three Snakes and One Charm from the Black Crowes. Again, there are another bands that I only know one album from them, which is the first album, Shake Your Moneymaker, obviously with the cover on Hard to Handle, and tracks like Jealous Again and Sister Luck, Remedy, but I have not heard the album really. So I think the Black Crowes are a very talented hard rock, bluesy style band that I give a lot of credit for. But I think that the Black Crowes' discography would have just been very overlooked after the first album, but I can't really address anything a lot onto that album and a lot of the band's discography in general. So I have addressed a lot of the albums that I do know about as best as I can. I know that Shizazzle has been responding to other people's comments, those that I have read before starting recording the stream. So that is personally it for the main point for the live stream of albums you guys consider to be selecting albums that are underrated favorites. I'm going to keep going, and I have no idea when I'm going to be wrapping this up. So from now on, now that that's done, I'm going to have a look at the chat. Harvester of Pizza. Well, I came on YouTube and saw your live, so I thought I'd jump on. Awesome. Cool t-shirt, by the way. I love Oasis. Speaking of Oasis, they are another band that I've not been coming back to reviewing their albums. I am at the era of Heath and Chemistry, so I will review that album and the rest of their discography. With the reception onto my review for Standing on the Shoulder of Giants, I know some people didn't really like my review onto that album, but personally, this is my controversial opinion, and I don't give a shit if some people hate it. I think that it's one of my favorite Oasis albums, and it's a very big move of direction for Noel Gallagher, as he was going through drug addictions at the time, and I think it's one of their best albums. It does contain some of my favorite Oasis tracks of all time, like Go Let It Out, Who Feels Love. I really like some of the later tracks, like Roll It Over, Where Did It All Go Wrong. The opener, Fucking in the Bushes, is just fantastic. I prefer it over Be Here Now, which I like Be Here Now a lot, though it can be very bloated and to have some of the worst overproduction that I've ever heard from a major big rock band. And I always would stick to the 2016 remaster remix album version of Be Here Now, because I think that is much more listenable and less difficult of an album to listen to. It does have some of my favorite Oasis tracks: Stand By Me, Do You Know What I Mean, Fading Out, and some other tracks. But if you haven't seen my reviews on the Oasis catalogue so far, then feel free to check the reviews out. So I'm going to go into Oasis once again, hopefully very, very soon. Psycho's Platters, I do love Trick of the Tail. I think really good transitional album from Gabriel era to Collins era Genesis. I think A Trick of the Tail is an absolute classic. It's one of my top 5 favorite Genesis albums of all time, and I am looking forward to go in depth with albums like A Trick of the Tail and Selling England by the Pound and Foxtrot, because I think those three are the 10 out of 10 albums for Genesis. Close of being in that rating is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And I really like a lot of the poppy era of Genesis, but I find there are albums from them that are underrated, which I like a lot. Like, and then there were 3 to the self-titled. I think Duke is the best in the poppy era of Genesis, but really A Trick of the Tail is the last of the classics in their discography. Harvester of Pizza, Costa is a great track from that album. I actually think Costa, over time, is one of the weakest Slipknot songs. Instrumental wise, it is very good. It has some aggressive groove to it, but I think some of the lyrics are not one of the best, especially onto the cut me up and fuck me up bit in the chorus. I think that is the weakest part of the song, but it's not one of those songs that I could have done without. I don't mind listening to Costa, but I could have done listening to that song more than Kill Pop. Personally, I think Kill Pop is one of the weakest Slipknot tracks. So that's personally all I would say onto for now onto the era of the Great Chapter. I think I would possibly do a re-review on the Great Chapter. I'm going to keep the original original review out because I gave it a lot of praise when it came out. But ever since We Are Not Your Kind came out, I think my opinion over time has changed. So I guess I would like to do it like I've done a re-review for Black Sabbath's album 13. Even though I have not done a re-review for the Book of Souls from Iron Maiden. So I guess that's all I would like to say on that part. Psycho's Platters. I think it's Psycho's or Pisco's. Sorry if I am mixing that up now. Platters, Black Crow's first 2 or 3 albums are really good. After that, well, I'll have to dig into the Black Crowes' discography. Great tunes from Harvester of Pizza. Do you think Noel and Liam will ever get back together? It's a reunion so many want. To be honest, I have made a video on my personal views about the whole getting back together reunion thing. I have said this before, and I'll say it again. Now that you've mentioned it, the magic is over for the band, and I think it's better that Oasis has moved on, because as much as I really like a lot of the discography, I think that Noel's in the better direction for himself, and I think Liam's solo discography is more of a favorable sense of a solo discography. As much as I really do admire what Noel wanted to make, but I'm always more of a Liam Gallagher type of person as a solo artist, and I am looking forward to his latest new album, Come On You Know, whenever that'll be out. I bet that'll be out next year. That's my prediction. But I don't see it happening for Oasis. The band had been apart, well, the brothers, for more than 10 years, and things have just moved on from the band. And it's just getting really, really annoying. And just, to me, one of the most repetitive things that so many people talk about when it comes to the division between the brothers and whenever the band's going to get back together. And I know that Oasis are a band that I have been loving a lot, and I love them as much as the Stone Roses to some other ones like New Order, etc. But Oasis, with their discography from Definitely Maybe to Dig Out Your Soul, their discography for me has been as consistent as it gets. I know some people after Morning Glory don't like the later Oasis albums, but I'm one of the people that really likes some of the later albums, like Dig Out Your Soul and Don't Believe the Truth. But I find that the whole discography and the career of Oasis should have just been left alone as it is. So there you go. Fair play, mate. I respect what your views are going to be, Harvester of Pizza. Life Goes On 1. Nice band. Which band are you referring to? Either Oasis or one of the band's posters of The Who to Metallica. There's an Iron Maiden one back there. So, same here. Much prefer Liam's solo stuff. I think Noel's discography as a solo artist is good, but I haven't really been paying a lot of attention to his amount of albums. I find with Liam's solo discography, it's more of the connection side for me. I like As You Were quite a lot, but I think Why Me, Why Not is an improvement of an album. It's better musically and I would say lyrically as well. I did see Liam Gallagher live a couple of years ago almost now, so there you go. So, anyways, guys, if there are any other albums that you consider to be underrated, then feel free to drop them in the chat right now, and I would like to address more of my views if I have heard of these albums from bands that I love. For those that know my personal taste, really. So Liam's stuff just grabs me more, more relatable to me. I can really see that. I think that Noel was more of the artistic form of an artist, but I think that Liam's originality with his own music is just not as diverse, but it was more onto the rock based. sounding era of his own work, and I just connect with Liam's solo discography the best, really. Both Load and Reload by Metallica are underrated. Load is one of my favorite Metallica albums, and Reload, if you have not seen the stream earlier on, it's to me their weakest in their discography besides Saint Anger. So if you want to see my full better thoughts on Reload and Saint Anger, etc., just scroll back to the first beginnings part of the stream. So we are pretty much more than an hour into the stream. The more I look at the time onto my laptop, but I think that this was a very well thought about idea for a stream, because I would have liked to make a video about your responses to this album's segment, but I think that a live stream would have just been so much better for the time being, because I do like to be even more interested with what you personally think of your views about albums that are underrated. And if you want to say anything else outside of this topic, then feel free to do so. And I would just like to stick around for a bit longer and hang out. So, Harvester of Pizza again. Great idea and nice hanging out with you. Thank you very much. It's awesome to see you here for the first time on a live stream on my YouTube channel. So I am going to be coming back to watch other streams from musicians on another platform, and I will be seeing your name with whoever you are watching. So, anyways, so far, cheers to Platters, to Matt, Billy, Mick, Guitar Storms, and Multilate HD, and Harvester of Pizza, and also Narrated Myths and Legends for participating into this live stream. Any new guitars? I got a Bernie Cream Les Paul custom, very cool guitar from Guitar Storms. Awesome. I absolutely admire Les Paul. Not new guitar purchases, because I haven't bought a lot of new guitars lately, but I guess if I want to purchase another one, I guess I've been thinking about purchasing maybe one of the Chapman guitars, the Rabia Massad signature series. But that's really cool that you've got a different colored Les Paul custom, Guitar Storms. The Purple Palace, the Purple Palace, I'm not really sure what that really is, Harvester. I do apologize. Billy Bishop, a lot of people consider Load and Reload albums by Metallica to be filler material, but they're underrated anyway. I think that there's too much filler on Reload. I do not like more onto the slower pace songs, and some of the ballads to me are one of their worst songs, and I think that it's just as really bloated as the album went through. I mean, on the other live streaming site. I mean, oh, I guess what you really mean, Harvester. But yeah, I think Load does have some of their best tracks that I find to be underrated, like the ones that I have mentioned. But it's not a perfect album, like with Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets. And I think that Metallica's discography, with the later albums, just does not define the band as well as the earlier albums. And with the later Big Four albums, I think Hardwired to Self-Destruct is not the best newer Big Four era album, in my opinion. Personally, I think it would have to go to maybe For All Kings by Anthrax. Although I have to go back to the whole discography of the other Big Four again. I'm not a fan of the Repentless album by Slayer. I think it's above average when I reviewed it, but it's just not a strong album for me. Um, and I know that Megadeth are releasing a new album whenever that'll be out. I'm not really sure. Guitar Storms, how's that Gary Moore Les Paul doing? Well, the guitar's doing very, very well. Just restrung it, done a gig last night. It was awesome. And I'm still going to be doing a lot more work with the guitar, and as well with revisiting some of the other guitars. Mick, I have to head off now. Thank you for the great live stream. Thank you for joining in, Mick. Hope to see you again in person, and I wish you and the rest of Big Wolf Band the best for the first gig in 2 years, or maybe more, that the guys will be doing. Much love to Jonathan as well, and the rest of the band as well. By the way, guys, Big Wolf Band, Birmingham-based blues rock band. Check them out on YouTube and Facebook and their website if you are into that type of stuff. Guitar Storms, what's your band's YouTube channel? I have mentioned this previously. My YouTube channel's band-wise is Hardgraft Band. No capitals, all in one word. So that's my... as I've done this before, a very quick plug, as I've done it before on a previous live stream. Harvester of Pizza. I wish Metallica would go back to 8 to 9 tracks maximum per album. Quality, not quantity. That's always very true. Because I think with later Metallica albums, they have shortened their tracks, and they will go into much more of the longer lengths of material with tracks that are longer than they should have been. But it's obviously up to the band. But if I'm going to be so brutally honest, I think with the later Metallica direction of songwriting material, it doesn't have a brilliant top tier sound of dynamics and presentation like with the earlier albums. And I'll have to say that the Black Album and even Load have a lot more of the memorable purpose. And I do admire what Metallica are really going to do next if they're going to be making another album, but I think some of the later material now is not really one of the better directions in the later era of the band's career. And I think that some of the longer tracks in their longer later albums do get I guess a bit bloated, and with the amount of the lengths of the later albums go. So there we go. I personally would just leave it like that. Billy Bishop, by the way, do you plan on getting the remastered versions of the early Metallica albums? I am not really that interested in purchasing the newer versions of Metallica's early albums. I'm not going to get the new anniversary edition of the Black Album. I personally think as well that their massive, astronomical load of tracks that were covered by bands and artists in celebration of the Black Album, I thought that was really not one of the best of ideas. I mean, much respect to them for making something like that, but personally, I don't want to listen to different bands covering very iconic Metallica tracks in part of a celebration of an album. And you know, I thought it's just one of the most unusual bits for that type of idea. If I would have had a thought of an anniversary for the Black Album, I guess it would have just been like a remaster of the album, add in demos, bonus material of rare live shows or video clips or studio tracks and outtakes, etc., but not a very, 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 very bloated compilation of artists covering their songs. Guitar Storms, I just got a Dio bootleg 1987 Hammersmith Odeon 5th of December. That's really, really cool. Mick, again, thank you, Greg. That's really much appreciated. Obviously, you are welcome, mate. And send my regards to the band. Guitar Storms again, Death Magnetic sounds like a guitar practice. All those riffs go nowhere except up and down netting. I think the album does have really good songs, but I find with later tracks they're good, but it's not one of those amazing amounts of material. And I still do not like the production on the album whatsoever. And at the time, when I was listening to the album, I had to listen to somebody else's different mix of that album, and you hear less of the compression of the guitars and hear more of the bass. That is the best way to listen to a different mix of that Metallica album that was so much more suitable, especially for headphones as well. So check that one out if you haven't already. Harvester of Pizza, I agree. I'd like Metallica to give Will Putney a go at producing them. He's done great stuff with Body Count. I think Greg Fidelman, as a producer who worked with Metallica, is a very gifted, talented producer. I mean, he had produced some of Slipknot's albums involving working with the band. But I can see why some people wouldn't really accept the production on the later Metallica albums as well as albums like Ride the Lightning, or as with Bob Rock's production with the Black Album, or even the 90s output. It's the style of production that I really think about a lot, besides the material itself. At the same time, when I listen to a major band's new album, or just a later direction of a Big Four album, or just any album from anybody in general, because production is one of my favorite things to think about. But when it comes to Metallica, I find some of their stuff, production-wise, to be so problematic. And I just find with the earlier classic albums, with like the first four, for example, they were really unique and not identical, but they have their own chemistry and separation of identity. And I admire the productions of those albums for that. Sometimes I do like to listen to some of the raw sounds of production, and I know some people don't like it when it comes to sounds of guitars that are really thin or mushy. Same goes with the drums. Or some people don't like a black metal sounding produced album. Or some people don't like the blasting out compression of guitar's distortion and thin mixing. So production is one of the best things to talk about into the quality of the presentation. It's all about the music that I would like to think about a lot, but production is always important. So yeah, I mean, some of my favorite albums of all time do have productions that some people would be indifferent upon, but most of the time, a lot of the albums in any genre that I like do have some pristine, clean, dynamic, and gorgeous, just beautiful sounds of production. So there you go. So, anyways, I am more than an hour and a half into the stream. The more I am looking at it right now, so I guess I would like to wrap this up in about say about half an hour or less. So, anything that you want to talk about or mention another album in the underrated spectrum that you like or love, please put them in the chat as always. And I think that I would like to do something like this again because while I know that doing live streams are very raw and unedited, uncut, even, um, I think that it's brilliant, really, to have a more of a natural and like on the fly, just go with it type of feeling. You know, same goes with many other things that many people do, that they just have to take their chances and just let it go into itself and let it work and progress. Harvester of Pizza, give me your views on the Metallica Lou Reed album. I have actually done an album review on Lulu on a segment of Sabotage Bad Albums, but if you have not seen it, I would definitely recommend it. It's an album that now I would say it does get overhated, and I used to hate it, but it was at the time when it came out that I've not listened to it all the way through properly, and I hated the album because of the experiment. But if you want to see my full review, my views onto Lulu, check out my review on Lulu. There are so many albums that I consider to be one of the worst albums of all time. I would still put Lulu in that list, but I don't go I don't go absolutely ballistic, mad as shit on that album as much as other ones that I really hate. So I haven't done another album review onto that segment for a very long time now, and the last one that I did, can't believe I have to address it. It's on Summer in Paradise by the Beach Boys. That was one of the most headache inducing ranting that I've ever done on an album that I very hate. So, yeah. And after recording that album, I felt lightheaded. That is the truth. So, moving on from that, because I don't want to talk about that album. Guitar Storm's live DVDs would be a good topic. I guess so. I mean, I've not got a lot of live DVDs or live shows in general from official releases, but there are some excellent ones out there. You got Pink Floyd, Pulse, and Live in Pompeii, and I really like um, Stevie Ray Vaughan live at El Macambo, and the Disaster Pieces Slipknot show, obviously, and some of the Iron Maiden live shows are fantastic. I don't mind watching live shows, but in terms of maybe more of the listening approach, I'm more of a live album kind of person, and I think it would be awesome to buy a physical copy of a live show on DVD or maybe on Blu-ray and enhance it, but to experience it really in front of you, you would just have to be at a show. And I am looking forward so much to see Genesis this coming Tuesday. So I wonder what that experience is going to be like. Harvester of Pizza, I'll give that a look for sure. You can check out any other album review in that segment, uh, besides Lulu, or just anything in general, Harvester of Pizza. Um, Guitar Storm's Made in England is classic. I've not heard that one yet. And I have heard Rock in Rio, which I think is an amazing live album. Fantastic. Great, great live album. To me, one of their best live albums. Any Jimi Hendrix live or Rory Gallagher? Not a lot of Rory Gallagher. I only own the Irish Tour 74 live album. But for Jimi Hendrix, I own Band of Gypsies, the 1970 release, the Machine Gun Live at Fillmore East one, and the 1999 vinyl pressing of Live at Fillmore, which is phenomenal, and the Songs for Groovy Children box set, and I've got Hendrix in the West live album. But I think my favorite live album from Hendrix really is the original Band of Gypsies live album from 1970. So that live album is one of my favorites of all time. And other live albums like Made in Japan from Deep Purple, The Who live at Leeds, and there are so many from other genres that I love. I love At Fillmore East by the Allman Brothers Band, B.B. King live at the Regal, and mostly live of Bongo Fury by Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart and the Mothers of Invention. I know that Roxy and Elsewhere is known as his best live album by Zappa and the Mothers, so I'll have to buy that. Who else? Live-wise, I think some of AC/DC live is really good. But I'm always the fanatic of the Bon Scott era. What other live albums I do like a lot? I do like 9.0 live by Slipknot, but Corey's voice sounded really rough, very rough actually, because he was going through alcohol addiction at that time. So not the best of his vocal performances. Black Sabbath sounded fantastic live. And if you haven't got the Sabotage Super Deluxe box set, the live concert that's in part of the box set is one of the best that I've ever heard from Black Sabbath. Fantastic. It's phenomenal. I've done a review for the box set, and I've talked about the more of the live set that wasn't part of the box set, and I did compare the remaster from Steven Wilson on this new box set version, compared that to the 2009 version of Sabotage. And I haven't listened to the Steven Wilson remix of Volume 4 yet, which I have a box set of that. For those that have not seen the latest update, the part 2 of the update that I show stuff I forgot to show from the previous live stream. Guitar Storms, Jimmy is so great. I have his Fender model, is amazing. I really do like a lot of the signature guitars under the Jimi Hendrix family name. They look beautiful and sound beautiful as well. AC/DC live with Bon is the best, I agree. Heaven and Hell live. Oh my god, Sabotage live CDs with the box set are quite really brilliant. Despite some of the sound from Ozzy's wrecking up sound of his voice, Tony Iommi's guitar work, some of his most manic and absolute best, especially through the jamming stuff. The drum soloing parts and the guitar solos went on a bit too long in my opinion, but the sound quality, it's like, wow, it's just amazing. One of the best sounding qualities of a live recording from Black Sabbath ever. I've listened to the live one from Volume 4. It's not as great. It's decent sound quality, but the Sabotage one was, it's just monstrous. The guitars distortion was great. The drums were booming aggressively. The bass was very big, and Ozzy's vocals, performance wise, sounded very good. And I admire the Sabotage era of Black Sabbath. And yeah, as I said before, it's my favorite Black Sabbath album. It used to be Paranoid from my original album ranking that I've done a couple of years ago. But now that I've done a re-ranking on Black Sabbath's discography a year ago, I am very glad that my list personally will stay that way. Even though there are some that some people would disagree with, and not say the albums are like at the accurate placements as mine, because they will select albums differently, higher or lower in their rankings. But I am still with it for accepting my list for what it is. um I am planning as well to do the tier maker video onto the Gojira discography now that I have re-listened to The Way of All Flesh, and I have just bought the link on CD, so I need to revisit that album. But I will make a post about it on the community section on the channel, just to say that I have posted a new video on tier maker with that band's discography. Um, Speaking of tier maker, there's a YouTuber who I loved watching, Free to Be Who I Be. He's been doing tier maker videos lately, and he's just done one for Slayer. He's done the tier maker for Fear Factory and Metallica. And the next one he's going to do is Machine Head, which I'm very anticipated for, because Machine Head are one of my favorite bands of all time, and I'm going to be ranking the band's discography under his comment section on that video whenever that'll be putting up onto his channel. But I do hope I do hope Ben outside of YouTube is doing very, very well in general with his active workaholic ability on being fit and believing in himself with positive mental attitude. If you haven't checked out his other channel, Free to Be Positive, I highly recommend that as well, because I love watching various videos onto his journey, going through fitness and through difficulties, going through very personal stuff, which I won't address here because it's better off if you would check out his videos. But Free to Be Who I Be is a music related channel for those that don't know about it. All in one word, Free to Be Who I Be and Free to Be Positive as well. Two great separate channels. And I did give Ben a shout out on his two channels on a few videos previously. And, he's just always one of my favorite people to watch on YouTube, especially through his way of talking about metal and reviewing albums and discussing whatever he wants to talk about into his own passion for music, and going through a lot of different stuff onto his Free to Be Positive channel. It really shows a different aspect of his own actual personality. So yeah, that's all I would have to say on that. So anyway, Free to Be Who I Be and Free to Be Positive must watch channels in my opinion, and comes highly recommended. So I think that's all I would have to say. I'm going to wrap this up in 10 minutes. So now that the main point for the stream is pretty much done, I would just like to chill out for another 10 minutes and just have a relaxing time to myself after this stream. I think this stream went very, very well, and I'm going to be doing the next one hopefully at the end of October, because I do plan to do live streams once every 2 months. And, you know, it's just one of the things that I did not expect to make it as frequent as possible. It keeps me engaged. It keeps me involved with anyone who I love to talk to. And even with commenters, different YouTubers who comment on my videos, people like Tyler, formerly known as Greedy Selfish 97, Free to Be Who I Be, Tainted Lord 87, aka Tony, Billy Bishop, Be Mindful and Wise, Zach D Productions, and various other YouTubers along the way to feel free and watch whatever kind of video that I put out. So, another new album review, set of albums to look forward to. As I said, I will be reviewing the new Trivium, the two Devin Townsend albums, and the Yes album, The Quest, that's going to be coming out. There are going to be some that I have listened to but never had the chance to review. So much on the list of albums that I have listened to, from albums that are one of my favorites to albums that are very weak or just good. So I think that 2021 has been a bit of a strange year for new albums. The first half, to me, is not as brilliant, but surprisingly, I think the second half of this year for the new albums is way more of an improvement. And I think that this was at the same time a discovery for discovering artists that I've not heard of before. Like I've discovered Black Midi to Genghis Tron, Dread Sovereign, and many other bands through the discovery of new albums. And there are some that people have recommended to me when I have made my video on albums that I should review in terms of new albums. I do apologize that I have not done quite a lot from the people that have mentioned some to me that they recommended. There are some from those types of comments that I have reviewed. But now that the year has been pretty much consistent on some great albums, I think it would be better for me to discover the new albums by myself, but I would not forget the albums that you guys have recommended. Oh, and also, I'm going to be reviewing the new Dream Theater album, A View from the Top of the World, as I did listen to their track of The Alien, which I did like, but I will obviously say my full thoughts about that album when it comes out. It's going to be taking some time for me to absorb some longer albums, especially for Dream Theater. So I think my Dream Theater review will not be posted exactly on the date. I think for albums like Trivium's, In the Court of the Dragon, and Devin Townsend's separate albums, their albums would possibly be posted on the day of reviewing the albums. Just like I did with the new albums from Deaf Heaven to Carcass. I am pretty much very confident what my top 5 albums of the year so far will be. Some of my favorites for those that have not seen my favorite albums of the year so far video, I've mentioned albums with Black Midi, Death Heaven, Genghis Tron, Fear Factory, Evil, Gojira. Well, I said Gojira already, I think. Black Midi. Then there's quite a lot of albums that I've just said that I may have shuffled a bit accidentally. So yeah, Dread Sovereign, Fear Factory, Gojira, Evil, Genghis Tron, Black Midi, Corpiclani as well. Corpiclani, forgot about them as well. So yeah, I am really, really pleased that this stream just went off very, very smoothly, as it should be, because it's something that I wanted to make instead of making a video, because it gives me more of a big open feeling to address whatever I want to address with anything that's been going on for my channel and with what I've been listening to. And this was something that I would possibly like to do. If I'm going to be doing a separate questions video, maybe I can make a video or another live stream like this one. So 3.5 minutes until the stream finishes for me, and thank you to the viewers that decides to join in and watch the stream. Even those that have not been commenting at all, you are awesome. Truly appreciate it. Really means a lot. And as I said earlier, thank you to YouTubers like Harvester of Pizza, Guitar Storms, Mick, Platters, and Matt, to Narrated Myths and Legends, Multilite HD, Billy Bishop, Stale Fluid, and as well as anybody else that decides to participate and like feeling much at all open and free to come to a stream that I do. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, guys. Anyway, thank you for watching the stream. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share a like, and comment onto my videos or any video that I do. Share the stream for a new one when that'll be out in late October, hopefully. And share the channel around to any music fanatic online through Instagram, YouTube, or Facebook, or whatever that you want to do. So yeah, Guitar Storms, thank you for the stream. You're very welcome, mate. Motorhead Live, very good one as well for live albums, and live shows to watch too. Harvester of Pizza, cheers to you as well. And take it easy, pals. Stay positive and happy, and keeping rocking out, guys. Same to you, and much love to every single one of you. Thank you for the new subscribers. I will be back maybe for another new album review, and I am going to be doing another new update video for the end of this coming month through a video, and I will keep you guys posted as always for more videos in the near future. Thank you guys for watching. Peace and love.